Hey, you guys.
Hey, you guys.
I'm going to begin by saying, I mean, the film is quite odd, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. I've never quite seen a film tonally quite like this before. And my first question really is for you, Patricia, is when you first got the screenplay, did you read it and think, this feels quite unique? Or did that come across instantly from the get-go?
Absolutely. I found it, first of all, I pinched myself that I was offered such a stunning part, a complex, bold, daring woman that I wasn't sure I could play. And having done so much work in this industry at this point, I was 57 at the time. I'm 58 now. Woohoo! And come on, baby. So I was so thrilled, but of course, what was best was that the script haunted me. It lured me in. I couldn't quite figure it out at first. I read it twice because the depth and breadth of it, and these genres that mixed and twirled and spin around from this brilliant mind. She's like I called you a beautiful witch, like a magician. Like she stirs things. So yes, I mean, I was of course. I couldn't say yes fast enough. Yeah.
Because I already gather, even just from yesterday at the premiere when you introduced Patricia, that you two have obviously created a real bond, and obviously, yes. We focus so much from the outside on the bond actors have with characters, but we almost forget sometimes that people make friends for life on set with other fellow people. I mean, and it sounds like you two have obviously hit it off so well. I mean, that must have been one of the real joys, one of the best things to have taken away from this whole project is your friendship.
Yeah, and I think that because what Patricia has to do is the front line of the film, because that's what actors are, and Patricia is the lead of the film. She's the whole perspective of the film is through her eyes as Mike, and it's a very vulnerable position to be in as an actor. And Patricia was so revealing, and you have to bring so much of yourself to a role. And so I think when you see that vulnerability in someone and how much they're prepared to give you to make a kind of vision come alive, it's an incredible privilege. And I think seeing Patricia Clarkson work was something that, I mean, friendship or no friendship, the work itself was an incredible thing to witness of how she built Mike. And I think the friendship comes because somehow you're put in a place where you can't disconnect from what happened. It's just so incredible. I'm so proud of the film. And I think that Patricia is, I believe, the best she's ever been. And I think she's just tremendous in it. And to sustain what she does throughout the whole film is an incredible feat.
And I mean, it's not just Patricia, but James and Jacki. So I mean, obviously on set you're a director, but you're directing legends of cinema on this one. Was there ever a point, Carol, on set where you almost had to, you sort of it was quite surreal where you looked around and thought, God, I'm sort of heading up a set here with some of the greatest screen legends.
I think sometimes you think, I left school at 16 with no qualifications, and now I've got Patricia Clarkson, Jacki Weaver, James Caan, etc. in front of me, and that is a weird moment because you're like, that shouldn't be happening to me. I left school at 16. I'm not like, this isn't like the world I ever thought. I used to watch a film when I was a kid and think it took twice as long to film as it, you saw. I didn't know anything about it, so I think for me it was this surreal experience being on set with everybody, because you're like, what's happening in my life?
And I mean, you mentioned obviously the complexities and the subtleties to this role, but it's also a very internalised one because I mean, you're not dealing with a huge amount of dialogue. Does that give you more, do you think, sometimes an easier route into the character when you haven't got the structure so much sometimes of words, but actually allows you to really get into their head?
I think it's a longer process to find a character without words, and I think it is a darker inward journey. Mike is so beautifully unadorned, no frills. I had nothing. I had no externals to rely on. It's such a deeply internal, insular, insulated character, and a woman who has rarely ever looked up and looked in, and never really, actually, I don't think, understood her own journey in life and herself. And so I think to it was a very private. I had to do very private homework. I had to come prepared because that's what Carol can't give me, is my own personal revealings, that my own personal journeys, the darkness, my own personal traumas. I mean, thank God I've never been through the trauma that Mike has been through, but I've certainly had heartbreak and loss, and those had to always be ever present.
Because I've just come from an interview now with Laszlo Nemes, who's a Hungarian director who's got a film here called Sunset, and he said that the lead character had secrets from him that he doesn't know and understand. Is that the case? Because obviously you've crafted this story, but do your characters sometimes keep secrets from you?
Oh yeah, and I think that's the beauty, because there's knowable and unknowable, and there's the conscious and the unconscious, and that's what great actors do. They bring something you could never prepare for. And I think for me as a director working with actors, I try and do as little as possible. I try and see what they're giving and harness that, because that's where the true sort of collaboration comes from, I think.
And I mean, your films are obviously it's sort of so steeped in reality. I mean, Dreams of a Life was a hauntingly kind of realistic. I mean, that was partly what made it such a fantastic film. But then since then, The Falling and now this one have had a kind of slightly otherworldly feel to them. I was wondering about that blending of reality and fantasy, and why you are sort of injecting that sort of fantastical nature into such a real world.
Actually, thinking about it, Dreams of a Life, The Falling, and this film, it's like a dead woman trilogy, because they all circulate around a dead woman. But for me, I love British social realism, let's say. But that isn't my forte. That's not how I see the world. So I find it's not like I deliberately go to be otherworldly or quirky. It's kind of how I see the world and how I assemble it. So my sense
also,
of,
I think, having getting to know you.
Yeah.
I think it's who you are.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's why storytelling and ways you tell stories, it's not just the story, it's how you tell it. And I keep thinking about the more stories we get told by a range of people, the more different ways you all are telling a story. And I would never begin a film thinking of it as a genre and thinking I'm going to apply a genre to a film. I think the style should come, if there is a style, or the form of it should come out of the characters first and foremost.
And do you guys ever sort of sit down and just think about the universe? That sounds like a really sort of hippie question, but it's quite overwhelming when we sort of sit down and start actually thinking about everything else that's out there. But obviously that's what a lot of the characters in this film are kind of contending with. Do you guys ever find yourself just wondering about?
I have.
Yeah.
I have looked up at the night sky and wondered. I have had my existential moments, you know. I remember, this is the sweetest. I have these little neighbors across the hall from me. They're grown now. But when they were little, my dog, I had this beautiful dog named Bo, and he would sometimes we would come into my bedroom and he'd just be standing at my window and looking out, and I would joke with the little kids. I would say, well, Bo is having his existential moment, and they couldn't quite remember, so they used to call it Bo's essential moment. But I actually thought, well, maybe that's exactly what it is. And that I think it is essential that we, at some point in our life, reflect on what is larger than ourselves.
And my final question is one for you, Carol. I was just wondering, because cop dramas, particularly those kind of set in America, are kind of so steeped in cinematic tradition. When you're approaching this, do you find that the way you approach this world was one that was informed more so through the cinematic lens as opposed to the real world?
Well, what was interesting is I hung out in a homicide unit, which was completely the opposite to what I've seen in films and TV.
And
they don't have this board, you know, where there's all the stuff on.
If those boards
they don't have the board. They don't have the boards.
And they're not packed and busy and everybody's screaming
mostly
inside.
It's paperwork.
Yeah.
Paperwork. And I asked this cop, I said, which film or TV do you think's most like your world? And she said Barney Miller. Because there was so much paperwork in it, and it was comedy, and it was
but it was also just like 5 people.
Yeah, 5 people. And I went in this one of the ones I went in, it was very large. They weren't using their overhead lights because they were saving on electricity, and there was no one in it. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I don't want to cross camera, telephone, ring it, blah, blah. They're all out, they're all out looking for the criminals or whatever, or making house calls. So I just, it is actually quite realistic, weirdly, even though it seems very strange. But actually, reality is stranger than fiction, let's face it, a lot of the time. If you really look, and you don't just look at what has gone before in cinema or film, you could create a world entirely unusual by dint of looking.
Yeah, there's loads of empty desks in that office.
Yeah.
There won't be many empty seats. You see, that's my zinger to you. Thank you so much.
We like that. Thank you very much. Hey, you guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey